While you struggle to afford rent, 7 mysterious Appalachian dynasties, each own more land than entire cities, yet none of them appear on any rich lists. How do invisible billionaires stay hidden, and what are they protecting up there? Back in the 1700s, something fascinating started happening in the Appalachian Mountains. European families weren't just settling there for the pretty views or fresh mountain air, they were buying up massive chunks of land, like it was going out of style. These weren't your typical homesteaders, looking for a small plot to grow corn and raise chickens. The smart ones figured out a trick early on. Instead of just grabbing any old piece of property, they went after their neighbor's land and the mineral rights that came with it. Makes sense, right? Why settle for the surface when you could own everything underneath too? Mountain families who'd been living there for generations often had no clue what their land was actually worth. They'd sell to these newcomers for what seemed like decent money at the time, not knowing they were basically handing over future fortunes. Local leaders caught on fast to this land-grabbing game. Owning property wasn't just about having a place to live, it was about climbing the social ladder. The more acres you controlled, the more people listened when you talked. These families turned land ownership into political power, and political power into even more land ownership. A pretty sweet cycle if you could get in on it. But here's where it gets interesting. Unlike other parts of America where land changed hands regularly, Appalachian families held onto their properties like family heirlooms. Fathers passed enormous tracts to sons, who passed them to their sons, creating dynasties that lasted centuries. Some of these family holdings were so large, they included entire valleys, complete mountain ranges, and sometimes whole communities of people who lived on their land. Then there's the darker side of this story. Native Americans had been calling these mountains home long before any European ever set foot on American soil. Treaties and forced removals pushed them out, clearing the way for these new landowners to claim territories that had been inhabited for thousands of years. The Cherokee in particular lost millions of acres through deals they never wanted to make and removal policies that destroyed their way of life. What made these early land acquisitions so powerful was timing. These families were getting in on the ground floor of something huge, though they might not have realized it yet. The mountains were sitting on incredible wealth, coal seams, valuable timber, and minerals that would drive America's industrial revolution. Every acre they bought in the 1700s and early 1800s would multiply in value as the country grew hungry for natural resources. The secrecy started early too. Many of these land deals happened quietly, sometimes between neighbors who trusted each other, other times through handshake agreements that never made it into official records. Families developed their own ways of doing business, their own rules about who could buy what and when. Well, these early land barons were just getting started. 7 particular families would rise above the rest, turning their mountain holdings into empires that controlled not just land, but entire ways of life for everyone living in their shadow. When most people think about powerful families in America, they picture the Rockefellers or Vanderbilts. But tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains, 7 families quietly built empires that would make those famous names jealous. These weren't your typical rich folks throwing fancy parties in New York City. No, these mountain dynasties preferred staying invisible while controlling everything around them. The Hatfields weren't just famous for feuding with the McCoys, they owned thousands of acres across West Virginia and Kentucky, stretching from one ridge to the next like they were collecting mountain peaks. Then there's the story nobody talks about much, the Tug Valley Company, which was basically just a fancy name for Hatfield family business. They didn't just own land, they owned the idea of land in those parts. Moving north, the floods controlled so much of Pennsylvania's mountain country that locals joked you couldn't spit without hitting their property. Well, maybe that's not entirely true, but you get the point. What made these families different was how they thought about ownership. Regular people buy a house and maybe some yard space. These families bought entire watersheds, complete mountain ranges, and every deer trail in between. Here's where it gets interesting though. The Tazewell family in Virginia didn't just inherit their mountains, they married into more of them. Generation after generation, they'd find spouses who happened to own the land right next to theirs. Coincidence? Probably not. Smart? Absolutely. The really clever part was how they kept outsiders away, not with guns or fences, but with paperwork. Deeds written in ways that made selling to strangers nearly impossible. Family trusts that lasted forever. Legal tricks that would make modern lawyers scratch their heads and ask for aspirin. But the Wilson clan in North Carolina took things to another level entirely. They owned whole towns, Not just the land under them, but the stores, the mills, even the church buildings. If you lived in their territory, you basically worked for them whether you knew it or not. Makes you wonder what kind of conversations happened at their dinner table, right? Then there's the peculiar case of the Bryson family, who somehow managed to own land that didn't officially exist on most maps. Government surveyors would show up, take measurements, then leave looking confused. Locals knew exactly where Bryson property started and ended, but good luck finding the official boundaries in any courthouse. These 7 families, Hatfield, Flood, Tazewell, Wilson, Bryson, and 2 others whose names still make mountain folks nervous to say out loud, created something unprecedented. They turned privacy into power, and isolation into influence. Each family developed their own methods, but they shared one common trait. They all understood that in the mountains, owning the high ground meant controlling everything below it. What made their land so valuable wasn't just the stunning views or fresh air though. Deep beneath those family estates lay treasures that would soon transform quiet mountain ownership into explosive wealth. The families who controlled these mountain ridges weren't just sitting on pretty scenery, they were literally sitting on gold mines. Well, not exactly gold, but something even better for making money in the 1800s and early 1900s. Coal was the big prize hiding under those Appalachian peaks. Thick veins of high-quality coal ran through the mountains like underground highways of black treasure. When the Industrial Revolution kicked into high gear, everyone needed coal to power their factories, heat their homes, and run their trains. The families who owned the land suddenly found themselves controlling America's energy supply. But coal wasn't the only jackpot. These mountains were covered in some of the finest timber in North America. Massive oak, chestnut, and pine trees that had been growing for centuries became incredibly valuable. As cities expanded and railroads spread across the country, a single large chestnut tree could be worth more than what most people made in a year. Then there were the minerals. Iron ore, limestone, natural gas, and even some silver deposits lay scattered throughout the region. The weird part is, many of these families had been buying up land when it was dirt cheap, sometimes paying just a few dollars per acre. Their neighbors had no idea they were selling off future fortunes. Here's where things get interesting. A study done in West Virginia found that by the early 1900s, roughly 70% of mineral rights were owned by people who didn't even live in the state. These mountain families had either sold their mineral rights to big companies or were working secret deals with outside investors. Makes sense from a business perspective, right? But it left local mountain communities watching their natural wealth get shipped away while they remained poor. The timber boom was absolutely insane. Entire mountainsides were stripped bare in just a few years. Logging companies would build temporary railroads deep into the valleys, cut down everything in sight, then move on to the next mountain. The families who owned the land made incredible profits, but the environmental damage was devastating. What made these families so powerful wasn't just owning the surface land, they controlled what was underneath it too. Back then, when you bought property, you usually got everything from the center of the earth to the sky above. This meant they could lease mining rights, sell timber rights, or keep everything locked up if they wanted to. Some families played it smart by keeping their best resources as family secrets. They'd let companies extract from certain areas while keeping the richest deposits hidden for future generations. Others sold everything quickly and moved their money into banks and other investments. Well, the mountain people living nearby often got nothing from this resource boom. They watched trains loaded with coal and lumber roll past their homes every day, heading to distant cities where the real money was made. The irony was painful. They were surrounded by wealth but couldn't touch it. But here's what nobody talks about: how these resource deals shaped local politics and power in ways that are still felt today. When you own half the mountain, people tend to listen when you talk. These landowning families didn't just sit on their property and count trees. They turned their wealth into something even more valuable: political control. Take the courthouse in any mountain county during the 1800s and early 1900s. Walk inside, and you'd probably find a judge whose family owned 3 valleys over. The sheriff, his grandfather bought mineral rights from a dozen neighbors back in 1847. The school superintendent deciding which kids got books and which didn't. Well, his land stretched from the creek to the ridgeline. Makes sense, right? Money talks, but money plus land ownership basically shouts through a megaphone. These families understood something most people missed. Controlling the land meant controlling everything that happened on it, including the people. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't just buy their way into power. they created entire networks. The Hendricks family might control the logging permits, while their cousins the Weatherbys ran the local bank. Meanwhile, the Ashfords owned the general store, and somehow always knew which families were behind on their taxes. Coincidence? Not likely. Local elections became family affairs. Literally, ballots often featured 3 or 4 candidates, but they were usually related to each other, or married into the same landowning circles. Regular mountain folks would joke that voting was just choosing which cousin they preferred. The humor wore thin when those cousins made decisions about road construction, school funding, and business licenses. Then there's the matter of jobs. If you wanted work in the timber mill, you'd better hope the mill owner's family liked yours. Need a teaching position. The school board was probably filled with relatives of the biggest landowners. Even becoming a store clerk meant navigating family politics that went back generations. And the weird part is how they justified it all. These families genuinely believed they were helping their communities. After all, they'd argue, who knew the mountains better than people whose great-grandfathers had bought the land? Who cared more about the region's future than families with deep roots? Regular mountain people saw things differently. Sure, the wealthy families built some schools and donated to churches, but they also made sure the best opportunities stayed within their circles. A talented kid from a poor family might get basic education, but the really good jobs, managing the mine operations, handling legal work for timber companies, running successful businesses, those positions had a way of going to the right families. Local newspapers, when they existed, rarely criticized the powerful families. Hard to bite the hand that buys your printing supplies and probably owns the building you work in. Besides, challenging these families meant risking your reputation in a place where everyone knew everyone. What most outsiders never realized was how these family alliances shaped daily life for generations. Road repairs, school supplies, even which churches got new roofs. It all flowed through networks controlled by people who'd inherited both land and influence. But some secrets ran deeper than just political favoritism, and keeping those hidden required methods that went far beyond simple vote buying. Everyone knows the real action happens behind closed doors. The Appalachian mountain families perfected this art form long before corporate America made backroom deals fashionable. Mining contracts, they weren't exactly posted on the town bulletin board. When coal companies came knocking in the early 1900s, these families negotiated deals that would make modern hedge fund managers jealous. Some agreements gave companies mining rights for decades at prices so low they'd be embarrassing to admit. But here's the kicker. Many of these contracts included clauses that kept the terms completely confidential. Local newspapers couldn't report on them. Town clerks couldn't discuss them. Even family members were sometimes kept in the dark about what Uncle Harold agreed to with that coal company from Pittsburgh. Property taxes tell an even stranger story. While regular mountain folks paid their fair share, some of these wealthy families managed to keep their tax assessments suspiciously low. How do you own 50,000 acres and pay less property tax than someone with a modest house in town? Well, you'd need to ask the right county assessor, and good luck getting them to explain their methods. Records from several West Virginia counties show vast estates valued at fractions of their obvious worth. Makes sense when your cousin runs the assessor's office, right? Then there's the environmental damage nobody talked about. Timber operations stripped entire mountainsides bare, but complaints rarely made it to court. Why? The families often owned the local newspaper too. Water contamination from mining operations somehow never became front-page news. Residents would whisper about strange smells or dead fish in streams, but official complaints had a funny way of disappearing from county records. Local doctors knew better than to connect certain illnesses to nearby industrial activities. The really weird part is how these families kept outsiders away from their land. Posted signs were just the beginning. Some areas became legendary for discouraging visitors through less official methods. Hikers would report being followed by unmarked trucks. Hunters would find their equipment mysteriously damaged overnight. Real estate agents learned not to show certain properties to buyers from outside the region. Local law enforcement seemed remarkably uninterested in investigating trespassing complaints against family members, but extremely motivated to pursue charges against anyone who wandered onto family land uninvited. But the darkest secrets involve what happened to people who asked too many questions. Journalists who dug into family business found their sources drying up overnight. Environmental activists discovered their funding mysteriously cut. Politicians who challenged family interests often faced sudden scandals or unexpected primary opponents with unlimited campaign budgets. Nothing you could prove in court, of course. Just enough pressure to make troublemakers reconsider their life choices. Local folklore is filled with stories about missing hikers, unexplained disappearances, and graves that don't appear on any official cemetery records. Whether these stories reflect reality or just mountain superstition depends on who you ask. What's undeniable is how effectively these tales kept curious outsiders from exploring certain remote areas. The question is, what happened when times changed and these old-school methods stopped working? The 20th century brought massive changes to Appalachian land ownership. Well, some changes anyway. By the 1920s and 1930s, many of those powerful mountain families started facing a harsh reality. Keeping thousands of acres cost serious money, and Uncle Sam had his own plans. The federal government began buying up enormous chunks of mountain land to create national forests. Families who once ruled entire valleys suddenly found themselves negotiating with Washington bureaucrats. The Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, that used to be private family land. Same with huge sections of the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. Makes sense, right? The government had deeper pockets than even the wealthiest mountain clans. But here's where it gets interesting. Not everyone sold. Some families held onto their most prized pieces, the spots that outsiders never even knew existed. Remote hollows with no roads. Mountain peaks that don't appear on tourist maps. Private kingdoms hidden behind no trespassing signs that actually mean something around here. And the weird part is, new players entered the game. Wealthy outsiders from cities started buying up mountain retreats in the 1950s and 60s. Think New York businessmen and Washington politicians looking for places where helicopters couldn't easily land and reporters couldn't easily follow. These weren't your typical vacation cabins either. Then there's the corporate angle that nobody talks about much. Coal companies didn't just disappear when families sold their land, they evolved. Modern mining operations now lease rights from the government. But guess who often serves as the middlemen in those deals? The same family names that have been playing this game for generations. Local folks still whisper about what happens on the remaining private land. Strange lights in places where no roads exist. Security teams that seem way too professional for simple property protection. Stories about government officials making quiet visits to mountains that supposedly belong to private citizens. But why should any of this matter to regular people? Because these hidden ownership patterns still shape everything from local job markets to environmental policies. When a family controls a watershed, they control the water supply. When they own the ridgelines, they control what gets built and where. The funniest part, tourism has become the latest twist in this old story. Some former family compounds now market themselves as exclusive hunting lodges or wellness retreats. Pay enough money, and you can experience the same isolation that once served much different purposes. Technology has changed the game too. Satellite imagery means truly secret locations are harder to maintain, but money still buys privacy, and privacy still hides secrets. What remains unclear is how much coordination exists between old mountain families, newer wealthy landowners, and corporate interests. Are they competitors fighting over the same resources, or partners in a system most outsiders never fully understand? The mountains keep their secrets well. After centuries of hidden ownership, private deals, and closed-door negotiations, Appalachia remains a place where knowing the right family name opens doors that maps can't even show you exist.